Hello, morning. I'm Jose Juan Ruiz, chairman of the Real Instituto Elcano, and we are really delighted to be here hosting this interesting debate on the transition of the European economy to a greener economy and society. We are fully committed with this kind of debates. We think that it's really important to debate, to put ideas on the table, and to see the different perspectives that we can have on this very complicated and very important issue. It's going to dominate our lives in the next 20, 30 years. And therefore, we are really very happy to see all these people who have agreed to be with us this morning. I'm looking forward to the debate. And the only thing I have to say is that go ahead, feels as free as you can put on the table the brighter ideas, the more defiant ideas that you have, and we will try to kick off the debate. That is the real important thing. Ideas matter. Thank you very much for being here behind the screen, and I'm going to pass the floor to Gonzalo Escribano, our leading researcher on economy, on climate and energy economy, Elcano. Gonzalo, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Presidente. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just an honor and a pleasure to be today with four distinguished scholars and also think tankers. Thank you so much for being with us. We were not waiting for electricity prices to go over 400 euros megawatt to have this meeting, but in fact, we were hoping it won't. But several people here in the screen were already thinking that this price spike in gas and electricity prices won't be necessarily temporary. And this is one of the reasons we are having this discussion today. But not only is about prices. I mean, the challenges of the European energy transition is also very much about geopolitics, about the role of hydrogen, for instance, about the role of consumers, that is a key issue, and also the impact on climate and climate action in the European Union. And all these issues we are going to try to deal with in less than 1 hour, which will be probably a record going for the Guinness. So without any more delay, I'm going to present to you first Georg Sageman, that is a good friend and good colleague from Bruegel. He has been publishing great papers lately, the last one for the European Parliament. We're going to tweet it so you can access them. And for you, the most easy and initial question, Georg, I mean, is this price spike really temporary? You have been writing that you doubt it. I mean, are we going for a more structural or recurrent pattern of price spikes in the future during the energy transition?
Thanks a lot. It's great to be with you. It would be even much better to be in Spain today, but unfortunately it doesn't materialize. So yeah, the question is indeed not so easy to answer. The current price spike that we are seeing is driven by many coinciding factors. So the assumption would be that the current price spike will ebb down at some point. So we have these issues with high international gas demand. We have the issues with kind of Russia behaving very, very strangely on the gas market, and we see also some kind of temporary issues with some power plant in Europe that might explain some of the problems. But there is a structural phenomenon behind, which is why I believe it's like weather and climate. So currently the weather is bad, but also the climate is changing. And so the structural phenomenon that I would see is in the past years, we have seen less investment in fossil supplies for the EU. And I think that is what we wanted with the transition. We've seen a significant reduction in gas production in the EU, for example, but also coal-fired power plants are not being replaced by new coal-fired power plants and so on. So we see a reduction here in fossil capacity. This has unfortunately not been matched by increased investments in green supplies. So there is essentially a horse race between increasing green and decreasing brown. And we are now in a situation where essentially we decreased brown faster than we increased green. And this gives market power to the suppliers of fossil fuels, which essentially led to the effect that the problems arise now faster than we expected. And that means that Russia seems to withhold natural gas from the European market in order to push up prices or get some political concessions, we don't know. But we very clearly see that they are not kind of playing the role as a flexibility provider to the European market that they used to play in the past, and they're able to do so in the past. So the question now is, what should the EU do? And there's a lot of national proposals. We collected them on our website, so if you want to have a look into them. And it shows that member states disagree quite widely about what lessons to draw from this situation. So some call for capacity remuneration mechanisms for building new power plants. Some call for slashing the ETS. Others call for increasing the role of nuclear. Some say joint gas procurement is the right thing to do. Others say the market is working just fine and we should keep it alone. So you see, it is now an open discussion that we are having, and it is a very important one. But you also should not try to throw the baby out with the bathwater over this crisis, but really reflect carefully, because we're talking about investment and investment security, and making sure that we are getting energy not only tomorrow, but also next year and over the next 10 years. I don't know how much time I have left. I would kind of say maybe take 2-3 more minutes to discuss a bit what I think in the short term and in the long term might be good or not so good measures. So on my not to-do list, there's essentially things like don't kill the wholesale market. So don't try to play with the wholesale market. We need these high prices on the wholesale market to attract new natural gas shipments from LNG. We need the high wholesale prices to wean off demand and kind of do some rationing of the demand in the European system. We should very careful, try not to disintegrate the EU market, and I think the risk might increase if the winter gets very tough. And this risk pooling between Spain and Germany and Italy and the Netherlands, I mean, that has been very helpful and very important to us, and we should not kind of show to market participants that we are essentially for national purposes going to disintegrate this system, because that will have long-term implications. We should not change kind of long-term commitments that we took, like kind of following EU regulation on Nord Stream 2. And so what I want to say is no emergency allowance for building this thing. The nuclear phase-out plans that have been decided, we should not change them on short notice because of the crisis. Those are things that kind of have been programmed 10 years ago, and we could not kind of make the market aware that we are not sticking to our commitments. So overall, not scare off future investors. What we should do is support vulnerable consumers that have very high shares of electricity and gas costs in their budgets. And what I think is a very useful tool in the short term is increasing elasticities in the system. So trying to help people to reduce their energy consumption by kind of giving short-term labor allowances or things like that, so that industry might close for a few weeks in winter in order to reduce their energy consumption, so that we get through the winter without any major problems. And maybe I keep the longer-term measures for later.
Thank you so much, Georg. Now I'm going to ask Kirsten, that is, he's now on leave. I'm not grown from SVP in Berlin. She's now in H2 Global. I would like you to explain to our audience what H2 Global is, and we have very recent news on that from the Germany side, and all your proposals to Europeanize H2 Global and to look for a hydrogen union. I think that would be interesting. But my question would be first, which role can hydrogen play in this energy transition in the European Union? Which opportunities do you see there? And also, what are the uncertainties that remain in this regard? Kirsten, please, whenever you want. By the way, all the questions you want to pose the panelists, you can send it by email to events@Realcano. So, Kirsten, hydrogen. What do you want to share with us on this issue?
Oh, it's a very broad and very daily and up-to-date topic. First of all, wonderful to be with you. And as Georg said, I would also love to be in Madrid, of course. I'm still at SWP, but about to leave to support H2 Global for 3 years. What role can hydrogen play? Well, I think it's right to have a political prioritization between energy savings first, of course, then electrification, and then we are talking about, well, green climate neutral molecules for the rest, so to say. But the big problem and challenge is that can't be a temporal sequencing, but we have to do that in parallel. The second point, I'm very much with Georg. I think we are in the midst of a preoccupying energy price crisis, which might have huge effects also on the hydrogen market. I very much agree with Georg that it's a structural crisis. I very much like the picture of we were too fast with brown and green doesn't have the right speed. So that's kind of where we really have to speed up again our energy transition. That would be my point, not to slow down. It's not a crisis of the energy transition, it's rather a governance crisis, so to say, and we have to speed up really with the regulatory framework. And that's actually one point I want to make. You could debate a lot on hydrogen and about the hen and egg problem, and where you should use hydrogen first, and how the market could look like and how big it is. But my major point is the market will depend on political decisions. It's about policies. It's really about policies, where to look to, which sectors to focus on. So it's really the demand of political decisions and around the framework. The other thing I wanted to make before really stepping into the question of H2 Global is I think within the crisis we're facing, it's also an issue about investment, as Georg said, but really about investment in infrastructure. So we're seeing that in Germany with the electricity grid. It's now the big question mark how to finance the repurposing of the gas grid, but also decommissioning of gas grid and stepping into hydrogen. Plus, you could also expand the big topic on hydrogen, think about speed trains throughout Europe and all these issues. So that's what I'm trying to make. I think we are at the beginning of a next phase of the energy transition. And we are also learning that we don't have to think only about an energy transition. That's already a huge Herculean task, and it's now also going to the heart of the industrial and technology policy. And this is very tangible in Germany when we talk about hydrogen, because I mean, again, it's going to the heart of Germany's industries. It's about automotive industries, it's about the chemical industry, it's about refineries. So we really have to think now through the decarbonization within a geopolitical environment that is, to say the least, very competitive. So we have to have, it's a really very sensitive phase. The other point on hydrogen I wanted to make is the gas crisis we're seeing now is, as I said, a structural one, but it's also a geopolitical crisis, and Georg pointed to that. And it's a kind of, we thought a lot around how an ideal energy transition should look like, and natural gas probably being a bridge, at least a fuel by default, if not by choice. But with the situation on the ground in Russia playing this decisive role in Russian supplies to Europe, this could really change the whole, understanding of the transformative steps, and could cast a shadow on questions of using blue hydrogen and turquoise hydrogen as well. So I'm trying to say we are in a second phase. We are at the beginning of a second phase, and we are in a very sensitive geopolitical phase. Finally, with regard to the strong role hydrogen has to play in the industrial decarbonization. It's the big question that I try to make is the hen and egg problem, how to bridge supply of climate neutral hydrogen with the demand of hydrogen and the logistical chain in between and the very early steps. And this is why Germany has developed this H2 Global initiative and program, because it tries actually really to define the whole value chain in a way that is compatible with European market regulation, which is really a challenge when you want to build up a market and a new supply and demand balance. Plus it is, I mean, 900 million euro, to be honest, is not that much. So we're not talking about buying the whole volumes that the German steel industry needs. We are rather talking about establishing a mechanism to test market structures, to test trading structures, to get a knowledge how this market might function and around the prices. And maybe I stop here.
Thank you so much, Kirsten, for this very interesting presentation on H2 Global. I hope we can still count on you to try, if you want to Europeanize that, perhaps it would be interesting to cooperate on that with the Spanish stakeholders. I go immediately to David from the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. David, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. David has worked a lot about the consumer's approach, and I want you to take in this consumer's perspective. You know, which role? I mean, one of the challenges of this energy transition in Europe is, in my opinion, I think I share this with you, how to involve the citizens. I mean, what role for citizens in reaching net zero? What would you like to share with us on this?
Well, first of all, I thank you very much for the invitation to you, to Lara, to Elcano, and it's great to listen to Jorge and to Kirsten's comments. They're fascinating, and I don't have anything to say other than that they all make sense to me. And the bits that I really have studied, they're consistent with what I've just heard. But I would like to focus on what I would call a lesson from the price spike, which is different from the ones that are being mentioned here. I'm going to argue that the price spike is symptomatic of an unbalanced decarbonization policy, by which I mean that the focus of policy has been upstream. It's been on investment in renewables, it's been on capacity markets, it's been on closing, fuel plants, deciding about nuclear. It's all mainly, almost entirely upstream. Consumers are left out of this for the most part until there's a crisis. When prices spike, then policy starts to focus on what to do. And we get panic in Spain because of a particular design of the retail market, but more generally we get a sense of the need, if you want, to do something, because consumers are now in trouble, industries are in trouble, smaller consumers are in trouble. This is a structural problem that I think needs to be fixed. I think it, in part, this explains why the price spike has been so problematic. There's so little in the way of consumer flexibility to manage this type of price spike that it's even more problematic in a country which passes on those prices to consumers but doesn't give them any ability to respond. So I want to focus on what I call demand side flexibility, which is increasingly important, but I think underestimated resource, which does integrate consumers into the markets. What I mean by demand side flexibility is the capacity of consumers or representatives on their behalf to change the net demand of the consumer on the system using distributed energy resources that are usually behind the meter. So I mean generation, storage, smart devices of different kinds, or just changes in timing. This has always been important for the electricity system, sort of nice to have in order to reduce demand at peak and to avoid building capacity, for generation or for networks. But it's now essential, and it's essential even before the price spike, certainly, because the penetration of intermittent renewables meant that there was a need to back up those renewables. At the same time, the flexibility was coming from fossil fueled plant. Now, what we've seen as a result of the increase in the price of gas and coal and CO2 is that the balancing costs on electricity systems are going through the roof. I mean, in the UK, I just saw that the balancing costs in the UK are between September and November this year are £1 billion, and that's double the balancing costs in 1 year ago. So on the one hand, we've got intermittency from renewables making it more important. On the other hand, we've got an increase in the price and cost of imbalances. We really do have a serious challenge to find flexibility. Now, demand side flexibility is one decarbonized source of flexibility which can contribute. It's not the only source of flexibility, but it's very underutilized. Second point is that electrification is, as Kirsten was saying, you know, a key part of the energy transition, of the you know, getting to net zero. And electrification, fortunately, increases the potential for flexibility, because we're talking about digitalized assets such as electric vehicles with their batteries and heat pumps and others that can respond to price signals. So to the extent that we electrify, we increase the potential for this demand side flexibility. Furthermore, we move away from relying solely on large consumers' flexibility to the potential to aggregate literally hundreds of millions of consumers in different places. So the potential is growing significantly with smaller consumers. However, we've got barriers. It's always been a matter for most small consumers that the costs of doing this were greater than the benefits. It just wasn't worth it. And we don't have markets which have consumers in mind. When we're thinking about wholesale markets, consumers are really not the players. So we've got some real barriers. And I think the good news is that technology is moving along. We see digital platforms which can now aggregate these technologies. We've got declining costs of batteries and behind the meter assets. And we've also got new business models which were being developed in order to make this easy for consumers. In short, we've got much more potential. We've got significant barriers, but they're falling. And so I think the main message I want to leave with you is that we're talking now about a source of, if you want, of flexibility and consumer empowerment, which has been missing in the way in which decarbonized policy has developed up to now. And looking forward, and we can talk about this, or I'm happy to talk about this, you know, in the next question, and that is how do we actually deliver this type of consumer participation so that we have a more balanced policy that builds both on the importance of flexibility and stability, firmness in the investment upstream, but also integrates it with consumers' participation as well.
Thank you, David. We will look forward to this question you self-pose yourself. So we wait for this. And now we go to climate. That is never better said, last but not least. And we got my colleague Lara to work on this, to give us some hint on this. And my question would be, in this regard, I mean, what is the role of the European Union energy transition? We got the European Green Deal and all the elements. The latest one is, you know, Fit for 55 package and so on and so on, in international climate action. I mean, what's the incidence? What should we be looking about this energy transition regarding its effectiveness and the traction it got over climate, international climate action from the European Union side? Lara, please.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here listening to all of you. We know that the EU has historically been like a mini lab for international climate negotiations, according to academic literature. We have internal asymmetry across member states in emissions, in impacts, in resource capacity to transform the economy. We know that we also have hard bargaining when we set ourselves shared but differentiated goals, and when we deliver on those goals. And with less than 10% of greenhouse gas emissions, the EU's role in international negotiations, as we know, has been that of a self-proclaimed directional leader. So leader by example and mediator. We have increasingly ambitious climate goals. We know that from 1990 to 2019, our GDP has grown over 60%. Our greenhouse gas emissions have fallen by over 24%. And we know that we have been able to play in the past a prominent role in at least moving the ball forward in international climate negotiations during the 2 consecutive climate defaults by the US. And with all of this in mind, the European Green Deal and its implementation package, the Fit for 55, I think there are sort of opportunities and challenges, and perhaps a short overview of what can happen into the future. The positive, I think, with the European Green Deal and the Fit for 55, we reaffirm our global norm-setting ambition. We also reaffirm that directional leadership stance. And we are setting ambitious goals, even if parts of civil society believe that they're not enough to be aligned with the 1.5. And in negotiating the internal implementation packages through all of the revamped and new initiatives within the Fit for 55, we help gain credibility in this also second stance or second phase of international climate negotiations, post the finalizing of the Paris Agreement rulebook. So as Kirsten was saying, there's a second phase in the transition, and there's also a second phase in international negotiations moving forward. So I think it's a really interesting crossroads at the moment that we're at. And I think on the negative side, it's important to think about 3 things. One, the delivery challenges, which all of you have talked about, so I won't dwell on that. But another 2 are the relevance and backlash challenges. So for the relevance challenges, we know that our shrinking emissions plus the return of the US to international climate negotiations, they're both great in terms of international climate ambition, but they inevitably reduce the clout, the weight of the EU in international climate negotiations. And I think that was painfully clear during COP26, when we saw that perhaps somewhat unexpected agreement or re-edition of the agreement of the 2014 agreement between the US and China. So that is the relevance problem. We also have a relevance problem in terms of how well the European Green Deal is known internationally. When we talk to our colleagues in Latin America, for example, in countries like Argentina and Peru, and to a lesser extent Uruguay, yes, they're concerned about the carbon border adjustment mechanism, especially for those sectors that are potentially going to be affected in the first version of this CBAM, if it passes and if it goes through. But the rest of the package is largely unknown, even if this European Green Deal diplomacy was in part demanded by colleagues from Brazil. And there's also, as I was saying, a potential backlash. And the backlash, I think, not only with CBAM, but also with initiatives such as the Global Gateway, which focuses, as we know, in delivering infrastructure and supporting the green and technological transitions. And some of the ideas coming out from of Africa, for example, is that the EU is coming with red tape, lecture, and climate colonialism. And I think this is something that we should probably manage in moving forward. As a perhaps final point in terms of the role of the EU in this setting, in addition to its continued contribution to international climate negotiations and staunch support of the UNFCCC process, the strength of the EU is also in engaging in climate clubs for COPs, I'd say. So the EU has been partaking in ideational clubs such as a Net Zero, which are voluntary. They rally actors, but they don't really require many things aside from voluntary commitments. In bargaining clubs, so member states partaking in G20 and G7 meetings that, as we know, include powerful players with big carbon footprints, economic weight, and that support multilateral processes by reducing the number of bargains that have to be hashed out, and that really do set the tone for what's coming out of international climate negotiations moving forward. Because if you look at the language on phasing down coal and phasing out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies that was in the G7 and G20 communique last year, you can really see what came out of the Glasgow Climate Pact. And finally, the transformational clubs that through a CBAM that could be shared across the Atlantic and perhaps with other countries, although they have been a bit more reticent in the past, that could really sort of seek to overcome the free rider problem and enhance compliance, while we have to manage the impact of the CBAM on less developed countries. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lara. We have gone very fast in just half an hour, so we got another half an hour. I will suggest you to go for shorter answers, and I will try to pose easier questions or shorter ones, so we can get some debate with the audience. I am already getting some questions. Some of them I think have been already answered, but in any case, Georg, I would like to make this bridge between climate that Lara just made with European action. I mean, we have been working, and you too at Google, on these national resilience and recovery plans. We have been working, Lara has been leading on which are the climate content of these plans. And this is my question for Lara next, but this is also my question to you. And I would like also to relate this to something that David said that I think is important. To what extent this energy price spike could make an opportunity to those reforms, to those experimental regulations you were mentioning, or on the other hand, should we be worried, because this is something that worries me, regarding also with what David said, kind of disaffection from citizens and consumers and some stakeholders on this energy transition because of the wrong perception that this price spike is due to this energy transition. I know I'm putting a lot of things together, but you can answer whatever you prefer. Thank you.
Thanks, Gonzalo, and also a lot of interesting thoughts from the colleagues that we can speak, I guess, for hours. The challenge that I see is indeed investment, and you mentioned the recovery plans, and we have been talking about the price spikes, and I've been arguing for a couple of years that on the electricity system, it's become increasingly difficult to understand what the incentives for companies to invest are, and whether they are set at the national level through national regulation, whether they are set through essentially planning that are then backed up later on by regulation, whether they are set through European price signals. And I have the feeling that also companies find it increasingly difficult to understand kind of what is the potential cash flow from an investment that they are doing in this very dynamic transition. Because if you go too fast, then you might not earn back your return. If you go too slow, you might leave money on the table. And what we did in the EU is we came up with these national energy and climate plans of the different member states, where they kind of lined out what they think they are going to do in their energy systems. And what we see in those plans, they are not meeting the targets. If you take them together, they are not really what is actually happening in the countries. And by the way, we all have a market-based energy system, so there should not be planning involved. So it is. We are here still in a very complex world, and I guess that is the question for the next decade. How we define the role of the state in planning energy systems together with the role of companies in delivering on that, and how we make sure that we are not doing huge mistakes, and that we also try new things, but without kind of giving in to the interest of the incumbents. Because I mean, they go to the ministry saying, okay, we know what to do. We built these power plants that we always built, and you just give us the money, and then everything is going to be fine. And then the transition is going to be too expensive. So I can only answer to you with questions, but my feeling is that the situation in which Europe is, where member states are strongly determining the cash flows of investors by their national ways of regulating things, together with a European market that has a certain role, but mainly for shifting residual amounts of energy across borders, but not much more. So I have the feeling that this thing is not yet consistent, and getting there is very difficult because there's so much kind of entrenched interest. Leaving you with that thought.
Thank you so much. Very, very, very synthetic. Kirsten, to put things even more complex, what about the geopolitics of the energy transition for Europe? I mean, you're a big expert on that. You have been publishing everywhere on that issue. 3 minutes on what are the challenges and opportunities I mean, is it going this energy transition to increase our strategic autonomy, and what are the risks, new risks we should be looking at?
3 minutes. Well, it very much depends how the energy transformation goes, so that's not a surprising answer, but I think it really depends whether Europe can get its act together. That's what I try to point to. I think the Green Deal is the big chance, because we are no longer talking only about an integrated climate and energy policy, but also about thinking industrial and technology policies through. And I think if the EU wants to survive is a too strong word, but if the EU wants to play its own role in the multipolar world, then I think it very much depends on how the EU can work and stabilize and transfer its stability and prosperity and welfare to the neighborhood. And Lara pointed to that, then this is a recurring theme. How to work with this narrative, or the concern that, again, we are talking about green colonialism out of the EU. But on the other hand, of course, you need strong sustainability, social and governance standards. So how to really create an eye-to-eye dialogue and a win-win situation, which is easily said, but so difficult to be done. And I think this is the big challenge. For example, in the hydrogen value chains that we have to create, we will see, and I hope we should see, a kind of nearshoring into the neighborhoods and value sharing. But really, again, as a win-win, because there are big risks that industries simply move not only their production, but also the investment. I think, and here, again, I'm coming back to the point I tried to make it. For me, it's about investments, as I said, indeed, but also about infrastructure and infrastructure planning. And here we really need an integrated infrastructure planning. And it's integrated also in the sense of thinking the neighborhood together with the European Union, because I simply can't see how we can meet our energy needs without, electricity grids, without hydrogen highways into the EU. So we will need green molecules and electrons. So I think on a certain point, we are back on questions like desert tech, even if we don't want to have the label maybe. But I think this is exactly what we have to look at. And then it's really about, value sharing.
Okay, thank you. This is, as you know, here in Spain, for us, interconnections and integration of energy markets is a key issue. So sometimes Spaniards feel frustrated when we listen to aims to integrate our borders without integrating the European Union first.
This is why I say energy union has to be expanded to an electricity and hydrogen union.
I fully agree with you. So we go now immediately for David and the consumers. And David has been asking me a lot of time for asking this question, and this why it was so problematic in Spain. Could it be an opportunity for consumers to become more active, more participative, and to get more ownership from consumers in this energy transition? David, 5 minutes, you got it.
Okay, but listen, I'm not going to say much about Spain. I'm just going to say that because of a badly designed retail tariff for vulnerable, if you want, 11 million small customers, the wholesale price spike passed right through to them. That led to social alarm, political alarm, and a lot of chaos in terms of government policy. But in a positive way, what it did was it brought forward the need to debate at a European level the future design of at least electricity, maybe energy markets. So given the time I've got, I'm just going to, we've already heard from Georgi the alternatives that are being considered, but I want to come back to my theme about consumers, because listening to Kirsten, I'm just sort of reminded it's all upstream. Okay, this is very much focused without thinking, do we take consumers with us? What role do they play? Are they empowered? Can they help to avoid some of the investment that we need to have at the upstream level? No one's saying we don't need a lot of investment at the upstream level. The question is, can we minimize costs? Can we take the consumers with us? They're citizens, they vote. Are they going to support this? Can we develop a model to export to the world with new technologies which are going to be needed everywhere? Everywhere, consumers are going to have to participate. That's what we should be focusing more attention on. So let me outline a model that we've been proposing from the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, and then end with a few comments on what I think policy implications are. We call it a two-market model, and there's two. The first is really just the spot market. It's the market we're always going to need. It's a short-term price signal which will be necessary for operations, as you were saying, for cross-border transactions, and for promoting flexible and firm generation. Those are going to be key, whether it's on long-term contracts, capacity markets, or what. We're always going to need that short-term spot market. Consumers in that market can, if they've got the right price signals, they can buy when prices are low, and they can sell their energy and their services when prices are higher. Okay, very simple. Just have to be able to do it. The other market, we call it an as available market, is for renewables, which are basically have fixed costs and almost zero marginal costs. In that market, we expect prices to be stable, but volumes to be intermittent. And in that market, what do consumers do? Well, if the prices are right, they consume, they have contracts for that type of energy, and they are flexible in the way they use it so that they consume it when it's being produced. They have matching consumption and production, and they have storage and other types of flexibility to enable them to take advantage of those stable and lower prices. Okay, so those are the two. Now, those markets actually exist. Today, they exist upstream. We've got spot markets where basically mainly large generators compete, where prices are set usually by fossil plants. And we've got, on the other hand, we've got long-term power purchase contracts, and we've got long-term agreements with governments where prices are set on the basis of long-run marginal costs, and they're basically paid when they produce. So we've got those two markets already. What we don't have is consumers seeing those two price signals. So the proposal, the market design that I'm talking about, is to pass on those different price signals to consumers, allowing them to choose what mixture of those two types of energy they want to buy. If they buy the as available energy, they avoid having to rely on the spot market. If they don't, then they do rely more on it, and they have more volatile prices. So let's just look at the policy implications of that, but also at what I was saying earlier about the importance of developing demand-side flexibility. Well, first of all, let this debate take place. Let it be a debate which is not just a political debate, but a technical debate, thinking about what will be the future market design. Whatever it is, it should incorporate consumers as active participants. Secondly, transpose the EU directives to national law. Most countries have not done it, specifically on access to all markets and on having independent aggregators there to assist consumers in participating in these markets. Thirdly, support electrification. with fiscal policies, which the Germans are doing, reducing levies on electricity prices, and finding ways to help consumers to, if you want, invest in electric vehicles, heat pumps, and other flexible devices. This is basically a way to empower them. And the fourth is to support innovation, and particularly in demand-side flexibility with policies, business models, technologies, all of which can be become the basis for a global market for the supply chain needed to integrate consumers everywhere in the world to markets. Final comment, the aim here is to reach net zero emissions at least costs. My argument is that empowering consumers is a way of reducing the costs of getting there, but it's also a way of getting the political support you need in order to achieve the net zero goal. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Very clear. Lara, we close with this question before going for the questions from the audience, but my question for you would be a bit the same that I asked to Georg. I mean, what about the climate content of these national resilience and recovery plans? I mean, is this a new opportunity for climate policy? What's the connection there? To what extent are we being aligned in the consistency of policies there?
Thank you, Gonzalo. Well, I think we have to distinguish between what's happening in the EU and what's happening overall. The EU National Recovery and Resilience Plans, where, as we all know, designed with the goal of fostering a green and digital transition. So what we have in the Recovery and Resilience Facility is a requirement for all national recovery and resilience plans to support climate objectives with at least 37% of investments. And in the plans we also have of course, reforms. What we see is that globally, the percentage allocated to the green transition post-pandemic is smaller, not in absolute terms, but in relative terms, to the amount allocated to the green transition coming out of the global financial crisis in 2008. So if we look at the data that came out from HSBC and from Edward Barbier after the prior crisis, we see that almost 15% of the funds of the fiscal stimulus packages were allocated to the green transition. Now, with data from July from Vivid Economics and others, out of the 17.2 trillion only that covers recovery and resilience plans or recovery plans more broadly from G20 economies plus other, I think it's 10 other economies, big economies. 10.4% of that amount is allocated to the green transition, and issues like biodiversity, for example, have been sidelined, if you will. In the EU, what we did at Elcano was study the national recovery and resilience plans and the climate component of this national recovery and resilience plans for the 5 largest emitters, so France, Germany, Italy, Poland, and Spain. More in depth with that, we had dedicated analysis and a comparative analysis, and we chose these countries because they amount to 2/3 of global of EU 27 GDP with 2020 figures, 2/3 of the funds coming from the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and half of the funds from the Just Transition Fund. And what we find is that there are certain challenges that also are in alignment with the issues that Georg mentioned before. So the first question for us was the project selection questions. Are we choosing truly transformative projects or not? And there are big questions across the 5 countries studied. We also see challenges in terms of limited administrative capacity and weak governance structures. So, for example, in Spain, there have been dedicated units that for the moment, and when we talk to civil servants, they say, yes, units are created, but they're understaffed at the moment. And it's not clear the extent to which we're going to be able to do appropriate follow-up and monitoring. There's limited explanation and awareness of the impacts of the reforms that will accompany the funds. There's also a question of the policy gap. So are we going to be able to integrate the national recovery and resilience plans with the existing climate and energy frameworks, or do we have to update that? And in our analysis, for example, of the Polish case, it's quite clear that certain measures and certain policies do have to be updated. And there's also a need to ensure that we do make this just transition happen. We can't leave that behind, because otherwise it will be a missed opportunity. And the sort of key recommendations that come out of that study is that it's very, very important to include concrete goals to enable that ex-post evaluation that is unclear across the plans. There are issues also with the data and the accuracy. For example, for the climate contribution in Spain, we go to the lever and component level, but we don't really have information at the project level. So it's very difficult to really understand the actual climate contribution of national recovery and resilience plans. So that's something that we have to take into account. It's important also to have a greater definition of policy instruments to be used. And I think perhaps from a more academic perspective, there's still a gap, as far as I know, in terms of knowing whether these policy instruments are going to reinforce each other or they're going to counteract each other. And there's, it's an academic question, but it's also a very practical policy question that probably needs to be answered. Finally, the engagement with subnational governments and non-state actors. I know governments have been striving to do this, but I think that there's room for improvement there. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. We still have almost 8 minutes to answer some of the questions. Some of them I think has been already answered, but there are questions precisely, Lara, on just transition. If you can elaborate a bit more from the European side, you just mentioned, but just a bit. Another question on carbon capture and storage, especially related to hydrogen, which goes back to the discussion of the colors. Perhaps, Kirsten, you can deal with that. One question is, the usual criticism of marginalist markets, and what would be go back to this idea of capacity markets, what role capacity markets could have. Perhaps for you, David, the role of distributed generation and prosumers, more if we can elaborate more on this. And finally, another question on the ETS, whether it is speculative or not, or whether it is jeopardizing industry, which is the latter is quite clear. I don't know. I will let you to self-select your questions and add a 1 minute final statement. So we got something like 2 minutes each, if you agree on that. Thank you so much for your effort to synthesize your ideas. Georg, whenever you want.
That was a lot of questions to process.
Select just one.
Yes. Maybe something on kind of spinning the wheel a bit further on the ETS, but also on Gazprom, which is a funny combination, I guess. The point that I want to make is that competition policy needs to have a closer look into energy markets, and we need to better understand in this new energy markets that we are going to have, how the new market structures will essentially look like, and whether they give market power to new actors that didn't used to have them in the past, and potentially also to new strategies. So if you think about the ETS, there is a question to which degree kind of the ETS market now communicates with other markets that might be bigger, and to which degree it is possible here that that strategies of creating scarcity are being played out. And I think it would be very useful to have much more analysis on that to get a better understanding, because we simply don't know, to then give investors again the credibility in those market signals. And I guess that would be my ultimate statement. My final statement is that we are here ahead of a long-term transition that will require a massive shift in the investments to completely new sectors and the green economy. And we need to get it right, and we need to have markets to play an important role, because only markets will be able to process the information in a speedy and efficient way. But for that, those markets are not going to develop out of themselves. We need to design them, and this is an extremely difficult task, because you have all these incumbent interests that want to turn the markets in their direction. So we should put more emphasis on not only on targets and on carbon pricing and standards, but into the way in which energy markets and climate markets are being designed and monitored.
Thank you, very useful, Georg. Kirsten, any question you want to answer and any final point you would like to make?
Building on what Georg just said, I'm also more interested in the steps in between. And I think we have it very clear how the energy system in 2050 should look like, but there is really a trade-off between speed and depth of the energy transformation. We know the steps that could help us in order to quickly reduce greenhouse gases. And as such, this is really a sensitive policy balancing that we're needing. I think we need all technologies, and this also answers already the question towards CCS and CCUS and direct air capture. I think if the EU doesn't look into that and is working that out, it loses a chance also in regards to technology industrial policies, because others are really looking into the carbon cycle. And yeah.
Thank you, Kirsten, for your synthesis. David.
Yeah, well, on distributed generation, I think that the first thing to say is that the very high prices today are encouraging more people to consider or actually invest in distributed generation as a way of avoiding paying, or in future and today paying the sort of prices that we see in spot markets, along with batteries in particular, in order to reduce the extent to which they have to rely on the spot market. This is, in essence, an example of as available energy, okay? Avoiding the need to rely on the system by, if you want, matching consumption with the production of one's own renewable generation. The similar model is an energy community, where multiple consumers share the generation and the storage in order to try, again, to avoid having to rely on the spot market. I think that this is not only beneficial from the point of view of if you want, reducing reliance on fossil fuels and decarbonizing the system, it is also providing flexibility, potentially, if the business models are being developed, to balance the distribution grid and to create more, if you want, more resilience at the distribution end. And finally, what I think it's doing, it's empowering consumers, and it's more likely to obtain political support for the transition if consumers are actively involved and have the equipment needed to participate.
Okay, and the last minute goes to climate. So Lara, please.
Yes, I'll try to respond very briefly to the question about just transition. Just transition, in our analysis, received varying levels of attention in the plans. Just transition measures in relation to climate change policies are explicitly mentioned both in the Spanish National Recovery and Resilience Plan and the Polish one. The Spanish explicitly allocates funds to just transition strategy, which is well known not only in Europe but also abroad. And it's expected to spur economic activity and increase employment opportunities in areas that are expected to be worse affected by the energy transition. The German National Recovery and Resilience Plans make no explicit mention of just transition within the climate-related pillars, but its overall framework highlights just transition and structural socioeconomic change, the Strukturwandel, I'm sure I haven't pronounced that correctly, please excuse me, as a priority, especially for German coal regions. And as regards France, the goal is to ensure policy coherence with just transition territorial plans, as well as other EU instruments. And I think my sort of takeaway message in terms of the EU and its international positioning is, beware of the backlash and relevance problems, and within that club's approach that is being put forward, first in academic terms, but now very much in political circles, with Scholz spearheading the club approach. I think it's also important to take into account how this is going to be received by less developed countries, and perhaps initiatives such as the South African initiative for the coal phase out is a good model in moving towards the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much to you four. It was a great discussion. There are a lot of questions. One of them is about the nuclear debate, so we need to get back to discuss on this. Thank you so much. Merry Christmas, Feliz Navidad, stay safe, and beware your electricity bills. Happy year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Happy Christmas.
Bye-bye.
And for our audience, as we used to say in Spain, in the cinema, you used to say, visite nuestro bar, visit our bar. Well, please visit our webs. You got plenty of papers there. You can read these wonderful speakers and panelists and get a lot of information and analysis there. Thank you so much again. See you next year. Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias. Feliz Navidad.